They say a second marriage is a brave thing, especially when the first taught you how easily love can rot beneath surface smiles. I didn't marry Mark for love, not exactly. I married him for stability, for the promise of stillness after a life of storms. Mark is reliable, generous with money, but stingy with time. He travels often. His work is a living, breathing thing that consumes more of him than I ever could. I sometimes think he married me simply to have someone waiting behind a well-kept door. The house is large, cold, and quiet. It echoes too much. I've filled it with fresh lilies and soft rugs, but it still feels like a place I don't quite belong in. A gallery, not a home. When Ethan arrived, everything changed. He wasn't supposed to be back until the fall semester ended. I heard the front door creak open one evening, just after the sun dipped below the horizon. I stepped out of the bedroom in my robe, startled. And there he was, taller than I remembered, broader in the shoulders, eyes darker somehow.
Ethan.
My classes went remote, he said simply, brushing past me like I was air. Figured I'd finish the term here. We hadn't spoken much before that. He was civil, always polite, but distant in a way that made conversation feel like trespassing. Mark blamed it on adolescence. I suspected it ran deeper. That first evening was uneasy. Mark was out of town, as usual, so it was just the two of us. Dinner was silent except for the soft clink of silverware. He barely looked at me, but when he did, just once, his gaze lingered longer than it should have. I pretended not to notice, but I felt it. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The wind brushed against the windows like it was searching for a way in. I sat on the edge of the bed, robe wrapped tight, staring into the dark hallway beyond the cracked door. The air was too still. Then, I heard footsteps. Slow. Measured. The doorknob turned. I froze. And there he was. Ethan stood in the doorway, his shirt half-buttoned, hair tousled like he'd just woken from a restless sleep. He didn't speak at first. Just stood there, watching me with eyes too old for his age. I couldn't sleep, he said finally, voice low. Sorry if I woke you. I swallowed. It's all right. He didn't leave. Instead, he leaned against the frame, arms crossed. This house is different at night. Feels like something's always watching. I gave a nervous smile. You get used to it. He stepped in just a foot, no more. Close enough to draw a breath from me. I like it better when you're here, he said, his voice almost a whisper. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. My mind scrambled for safe ground. You should get some rest. Big week ahead, I'm sure. He nodded, but his gaze didn't falter. Good night, Clara. He left, closing the door softly behind him. I stared at the space he'd just occupied, heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. I wanted to feel disturbed, to label it as a misunderstanding. A strange moment in a strange house. But beneath that denial was something I didn't want to name. I crawled back into bed and lay there, eyes wide open, until morning. The next day, things returned to normal. Or they pretended to. Ethan greeted me with a polite nod, headphones around his neck, books in hand. I responded with practiced ease, my voice level, smile restrained. But something had shifted. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. The way he looked at me, not like a stepson should. Not like a boy at all. There was weight in his eyes. Hunger, maybe. Or defiance. I wasn't sure which frightened me more. That evening, I passed by his room on the way to mine. The door was slightly ajar. I paused, listening. Inside, music played low, rhythmic, haunting. I moved on quickly, afraid to be caught loitering. When I reached my room, I locked the door behind me. I told myself it was for safety, for comfort. But deep down, I knew it was because part of me had wanted him to open it again. And part of me was terrified that he would. It began as something unspoken, a current beneath the surface. We navigated around it, both pretending nothing had changed. But it was there, alive in every glance, every silence too long, every moment that held more weight than it should. Mark returned 2 days after Ethan's arrival. The house came alive with his voice, his presence, his routines. He greeted Ethan with a firm clap on the back, asked about classes, Made vague plans to play golf over the weekend. He kissed me on the cheek as he passed, already on his phone, already somewhere else. At dinner, the three of us sat like a family might. Ethan kept his eyes on his plate, answering his father with clipped responses. When Mark excused himself to take a call, Ethan looked up, at me, only at me. His gaze held steady. There was no confusion in it. No apology. Only certainty. That night I tried to read. The words blurred. The page seemed foreign. My thoughts were loud, uninvited. I couldn't stop replaying the way he had looked at me, like he was reading a truth I hadn't said aloud. The knock came past midnight. Soft but not tentative. I didn't move. Then the knob turned. I hadn't locked it. He entered quietly, wearing a gray t-shirt and flannel pants. His hair was damp, and I could smell the faint trace of soap on his skin. He didn't ask if he could come in. He simply sat on the edge of the bed, like he had the first time. "I can't sleep," he said again. But this time, there was no apology in his tone. "Ethan." My voice cracked before I could finish. His name felt dangerous on my tongue. "You haven't asked me why I'm really here," he said, watching me. "Not once." I swallowed. I didn't think it was my place. He leaned closer, his voice a low current. "Maybe it should be." I pulled the blanket tighter around me, but I didn't tell him to leave. "You shouldn't be here," I whispered. He tilted his head, eyes scanning mine. "But I am." We sat there, suspended in a moment I didn't want to name. The room felt heavy, like the air itself was watching us. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched my hand. I should have pulled away. I didn't. His thumb traced the line of my wrist, light as breath. My heart raced, not in fear, but in recognition. "We can't," I said, but it sounded like a question. He moved closer, our faces inches apart. "Then stop me." I didn't. His lips brushed mine, soft, searching, uncertain for the span of a breath. And then, like something breaking, we gave in. The room fell away. The silence shifted into something else. His hands were urgent but reverent, and mine, traitorous in their welcome, answered every touch. It wasn't about love. It was about gravity. About two people who knew better, but didn't care in that moment. Afterward, the silence returned, louder than before. Ethan lay beside me, one arm behind his head, eyes fixed on the ceiling. I sat up, the sheet clutched to my chest, my breath shallow. "This never happened," I said. He turned his head, studied me. "Is that what you want to believe?" "It's what has to be true." He nodded once, but not in agreement. In acknowledgement. Like someone noting the beginning of a storm. He slipped out of bed without another word, pulling the door closed behind him. I remained there, frozen, the weight of what we'd done pressing into my bones. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Only the dull throb of something irreversible. The next morning, Mark was already gone. A note on the counter said he'd be back by the weekend. I stood in the kitchen, coffee in hand, wearing the mask of routine. Ethan entered, said nothing. He poured cereal like nothing had happened, like we hadn't crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I watched him, waiting for the world to tilt. It didn't. As he passed by me to leave the room, his fingers brushed my waist, so light it might have been accidental. But we both knew it wasn't. My breath caught. I knew then that silence wouldn't save me. That whatever we'd started wasn't finished. Not yet. Days passed, though none of them felt real. Mark returned that Friday, unaware of the fracture beneath his roof. He greeted me with his usual kiss on the cheek, absent, habitual, like clockwork. He didn't notice that my smile didn't quite reach my eyes. He didn't see the way my hands trembled when I served him coffee, or how I flinched when Ethan entered the room. Ethan, to his credit, played his role with ease. He was composed, indifferent, unreadable. He spoke to his father with calm detachment and to me with polite distance. It was like we had returned to the beginning, except the silence between us had a memory now. A pulse. Every moment we shared in the same room was charged. The glance he held 1 second too long. The way his shoulder brushed mine when we passed in the hallway. The low timbre of his voice when he said my name. None of it was overt. Nothing that could be called out. But it lingered. I began to avoid him, out of necessity rather than principle. I buried myself in routine, laundry, dinner, grocery lists. I folded towels with meticulous care, arranged books I didn't plan to read. But it didn't help. My mind circled the same memory over and over. The press of his hand on my skin, the way I'd leaned into it. Guilt was no longer a visitor. It had unpacked its bags and settled inside me. One evening, Mark fell asleep on the sofa, television humming in the background. I watched him for a long time, studying the softness in his features that only sleep revealed. I used to love him, I think. Or I loved the idea of being loved by someone who wouldn't leave. That was the lie I told myself. A sudden creak behind me broke my thoughts. Ethan stood in the hallway, watching me from the shadows. "Don't," I whispered, barely louder than the television static. He stepped forward anyway. "I can't do this," I said, turning away. "You need to stop." He exhaled slowly. "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," I snapped, voice trembling. "This is a house, Ethan. A family. Your father." "My father," he interrupted, his tone sharper now, "is barely here. He doesn't see you. He never has. That doesn't give you the right." "I never asked for the right," he said, stepping closer. "You think I planned this? That I wanted to feel this way?" His voice cracked then, just barely. It caught me off guard. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not a predator, not a boy playing at manhood, but someone just as lost as I was. "I hate what we did," I said, the truth catching in my throat. "But I don't know how to forget it." "Then don't," he said, almost pleading. "Just let it be what it was." "And what was it?" I asked, not sure I wanted an answer. He didn't reply. The silence said enough. 2 days later, he packed his things. I watched from the upstairs window as he loaded his car. He didn't come inside to say goodbye. Part of me was relieved. The other part ached in a place I didn't know existed before him. Mark asked where Ethan had gone, and I told him he needed space. That he was feeling overwhelmed. Mark nodded, already distracted by a phone call, already moving on. That night, I lay awake in the dark, the same way I had before it all began. I stared at the door, half expecting it to open again. It didn't. The house felt bigger somehow, emptier, like something had been extracted from it, leaving only silence in its wake. I thought infidelity would feel like fire, destructive, uncontrollable. But it felt more like water, slow and seeping, quietly drowning. I haven't spoken to Ethan since he left. I don't know if I ever will. But sometimes, I still hear footsteps outside my door. I still imagine his voice in the quiet, his presence lingering like a scent on the pillow. This story has no ending, not really. Just a fracture that refuses to heal. A moment that keeps echoing in places it shouldn't. I return to that night more often than I should. To the click of the doorknob. The sound of silence being broken. And the way everything changed because I let it.